Got it?
Yeah, you ready?
Yes, sir.
Committee will be in order. The opportunity for us to meet today on the Cyber Intelligence Sharing and Protection Act is a very important action that the United States Congress is taking today, and today the Rules Committee will hold the hearing on this very important issue. I first want to say welcome back to one of our colleagues who we've missed, the gentleman Alcee Hastings from Florida, who is back. How are you?
I'm coming off pretty fast, Mr. Chairman, but I've learned I think I carry the cane with me all the time.
I did notice that you smiled at me when we greeted each other on the floor, so I'm forewarned, I assume. Good. Good. Well, I'm glad that you're back. The chance for us to be together today comes just hours after the knowledge of what happened yesterday in Boston at the Boston Marathon. Once again, Americans were reminded of the threat that looms against us, not just each of us individually, but collectively as a nation, and we as free people. And certainly as we all watched our news channel that we chose yesterday, we saw the visions and ideas that go before us that are emotion-driven, and yet we recognize that we live in a very dangerous world in dangerous times, and there are those that would choose to do harm to individuals within our society. I was reminded once again of how important our first responders are, our law enforcement, and perhaps more importantly, as what we know, the intelligence community. They are for sure the first line of defense because many times they hear, think, and see things before we do and contemplate ideas about attacks that can be made against our allies and American citizens. So today I welcome both of you, the young chairman of the Intelligence Committee, Mr. Rogers, a veteran of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, very young, and certainly his very capable and able ranking member, Mr. Ruppersberger from Maryland. And we welcome both of you today before the committee. And without objection, any statement that you would wish to make, we'd love to hear from, and certainly any written testimony will be entered into the record. And I would ask the gentleman, if I can at this time, Mr. McGovern, if he has any opening remarks that he'd like to make. Gentleman's recognized.
No, I don't, but I want to thank you for paying tribute to the people up in Massachusetts who were so tragically attacked by someone yesterday. And there's some things that are so awful you can't put it to words, but my prayers are with all those families who have been victimized. That young little boy, 8 years old, who was there to cheer his father on, and it was killed, and so many other people who are still suffering. So, in any event, it reminds us that we need to ever be vigilant, and I hope they catch this person or group who is responsible and hold them accountable for this terrible, terrible tragedy. But I have no other comments. I look forward to hearing your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I saw Mr. McGovern last night on the street afterwards, and I knew, was feeling the full force of this as the effect as a man from Massachusetts, a representative, seeing the medical community and first responders doing their job. And I took that your kind words last night, and I hope you took mine too with the betterment for what we do. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Yields back his time. We're delighted to have both of you and the gentleman, the chairman of the committee, Mr. Rogers, recognized.
Obviously, as you said, there are no words for it, and it's a very cruel reminder of the threats that we face every day from both physical violence and, in this case, the reason we're here today is the civilians that were so mercilessly slaughtered yesterday are also under attack on their computers, and is by no means a comparison that we make today, other than the importance of making sure we defend ourselves in all forms of attack. Chairman Sessions, Ranking Member Slaughter, thank you for the opportunity to testify today before the Rules Committee in support of H.R. 624, the Cyber Intelligence Sharing and Protection Act. This is urgently needed legislation on a vital and pressing national security problem, the efforts of advanced nation states engaged in wide-ranging and aggressive efforts to penetrate American computer systems and networks in both the government and the private sector. The economic costs of this cyber espionage have already been staggering, and the problem has only become more severe and urgent in the time that has passed since the House passed this bill on a bipartisan basis last year. The bill, the only really changes here is the threat is worse and the bill is better. The bill before you would address one critical part of this problem by providing for the sharing of cyber threat information between the government and the private sector and giving clear authority for the private sector to defend its own networks, all the while providing several strong and specific protections for privacy and civil liberties throughout the bill. Those protections are even stronger after the committee's work to continue to improve the bill with input from the private sector, advocacy groups, and the executive branch. In addition to numerous privacy protections that were already in the bill as introduced, the committee added 5 additional privacy amendments with bipartisan majorities during the markup. I'll just go through those very quickly. The hackback provision, the committee adopted an amendment by Mr. Langevin to make clear that the bill provides no new authority to allow companies to hack back against their attackers. Private sector use restriction. This amendment limits private sector use of information received under the bill to only cybersecurity purposes and was offered by Mr. Heck and Mr. Himes of the committee. Mandatory government minimization. The bill now requires additional procedures to protect privacy and civil liberties and limit the government's retention of that information. Was also an amendment by Mr. Himes. We struck the national security use. The committee struck authorization for the government to use information shared under the bill for national security purposes unrelated to cybersecurity. So it further restricts the use of this information by Ms. Sewell from Alabama. It provided additional oversight as well. Finally, the committee added roles for the Privacy and Civil Liberties Board and the individual agency privacy officers for additional oversight of the government's use of the information. That would be a layer of 4 oversight bodies making sure that the information is obtained and used in accordance with the law. That's really an unprecedented level of security and safety for people's privacy and civil liberties. I'm particularly pleased that this bill again reflects the results of a full and inclusive bipartisan effort. It was developed and improved with the full support and involvement of the ranking member, Mr. Rupersberger. We first started out, Mr. Chairman, we started out with a blank piece of paper. We knew what the problem was, but we wanted to do a collaborative effort to solve the problem, protect civil liberties, and allow the private sector to protect its own private networks. I think we've accomplished that. So we have both the high-tech industry of the Silicon Valley and New York City are on the same bill. They all believe this is the right approach to allow them to protect their networks just by sharing zeros and ones in a certain pattern moving at the speed of light. This is machine to machine. There is no content that will be reviewed in this procedure. There is no new surveillance authorities in this bill. I want to stress that again. There are no new surveillance authorities in this bill. The NSA and the CIA do not monitor domestic internet networks, and they will not surveil those networks when this bill becomes law. I want to thank the leadership of the ranking member. This has been a difficult and long slog. We have argued and fought and negotiated and debated every comma, period, and paragraph in this bill. And again, we tried to be open to ideas and suggestions from all corners. And I think this bill certainly reflects that. The bill came out of committee with a strong bipartisan vote of 18-2. In addition, we've continued our close consultation with those private sector companies, trade groups, privacy and civil liberty advocates, and the executive branch. And I just wanted to add, we have that last amendment by myself and Mr. Rupersberger, Mr. McCall, and Mr. Thompson of the Homeland Security Committee that would put a civilian face, which was many's concern. I think, matter of fact, Ms. Tchaikovsky was one of those. So we have all agreed on language would be an amendment I would hope you would consider, Mr. Chairman, in the processing of this bill. I think it would be an important amendment and takes that one other very large step, I think, to getting people comfortable with what we're trying to accomplish here, which is stopping nation states like China, Iran, and North Korea from doing harm and damage to our United States economy and possibly worse. And so with that, I thank you and look forward to your questions. And we'll turn it over to Mr. Ruppersberger, if I may, sir.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I appreciate you not only taking time, but the succinctness of your testimony that you know impacts many members of Congress who are highly concerned about the things that you spoke of. The gentleman, the ranking member from Maryland, is recognized, and welcome to the Rules Committee.
Glad to be here, Mr. Chairman, and the members of the committee, both Democratic and Republican side. A little history. Hello? Oh. Thanks. The little bit of background of how we got where we were. I was involved, I think I was chairman of the Technical Tactical Committee and the Intelligence Committee. It was about 2006. And I had, at that time, the Director of National Intelligence came to see me, I think Admiral McConnell, and he briefed me on cyber threats and how serious it was. And I, at that point, was not aware of that threat and the attacks that were going on as we spoke in 2006, China stealing information from our space industry, and it went on. And at that time, I went to Jack Murtha, and I said, Jack, this is really serious. We need to focus on it. Jack said, well, you know, you and Dick's work through this, and that's what really started the involvement in getting involved in how we deal with cyber. Unfortunately, no one was doing anything for a long period of time. We have this threat. We're continued to be attacked, and we just were all over the map. When Chairman and I had leadership in the committee, Intelligence Committee, we decided that we were going to try to find a bill to get the camel's nose in this tent so we can start protecting our country. We brought in all the privacy groups, we brought business groups in, we brought the White House group for almost a year, and we had work sessions so we could put together a bill. What we really felt, based on our jurisdiction, what we needed to do is that we had to deal with the issue of information sharing. Now, let me give you a little background. There are 10 providers, AT&T, Verizon, Comcast, 10 providers control 80% of the network in this country. Most people don't realize that. And because of that when our providers, who represent you and me and businesses and whatever, when our providers wanted to hear about the threat or call like you would if your house was being robbed, 911, and they have the intelligence community come in who has a lot of sophistication in this area, the intelligence community basically couldn't communicate with them or deal with the issue of the threat because of a 1947 law that said you're not allowed to pass classified information, you know, to people who aren't clear. So that was step one as far as what we had to do to resolve the issue. Also, because of our limited jurisdiction, we came together with this bill trying to deal with all issues, including privacy, to get a bill passed to allow us to communicate. When I say us, the government communicating with the private sector. Remember, 80% of the network is controlled by those 10 providers. Now, after we came together with our bill, a lot of input, and dealing with the privacy issues, and I just want to make this statement. Secretary Napolitano, Director Mueller, and Director of the NSA, Alexander, all said that we can't properly protect our country from these cyber attacks unless the government and unless the private sector work together and work together to information share. It just can't be done. So, you know, and those comments were just made a week ago by all three. So Mike and I felt in the beginning we had a lot of battles. I know that Mike initially wanted to have the bill that we put out there that you would have 100% immunity. And I said, you know, I can't. I represent Democrats. I have to deal with the issue of privacy. We cannot give 100% immunity. You have to have the ability when someone is wrong or hurts you or passes information or whatever that be at least the ability to face the redress in a court of law. That's our system in this country. It was a lot of debate, but we came up with a language. If businesses use good faith effort to do the job as it relates to protecting their customers on cyber, that they would receive immunity as to that. So we resolved that. That was a really tough issue for a long period of time. Okay, then we realized, too, that why we had to give some type of immunity is because the businesses aren't going to come to the table. They're not going to be involved unless they give an incentive, and that incentive was the good faith effort. Well, eventually we passed our bill in a bipartisan way, and the bill went to the Senate and it stalled. I think what happened to the Senate, the bill was too voluminous. It was dealing with issues of critical infrastructure, which wasn't in our jurisdiction anyhow. So then we passed the bill, and the bill died because the Senate didn't move. When we came back again to introduce this bill, and Mike and I, who trust each other, we disagree, we have our own issues, but we realized that we had to make the bill better. So whether or not we felt the bill, from my point of view, protected privacy, we had to make sure that there was a perception that we dealt with the issue of privacy. In my opinion, you don't have security unless you have privacy. I think that's important. So I give Mike credit. We sat down. We started to negotiate with the White House on a regular basis. In fact, we negotiated with him just yesterday, the Chief of Staff, McDonough, and I've had a conversation with him today. And what we did, we tried to deal with even more issues. So we changed. Number one, we now have what you call minimization, the ability to take out the private information on 100% on the government side. That's new in the bill. We also have provided checks and balances. And we probably have more checks and balances in this bill than the Patriot Act. The Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board is now part of our bill. They're going to look at the bill, they're going to oversee the bill, they review the bill, and how it affects privacy. We have privacy officers of different government agencies who must also conduct a classified and unclassified review of issues on privacy. That's now part of the bill. And the other issue, we also have, there are 4 elements of oversight right now, is the Inspector General, whose job it is to oversee these agencies. The Inspector General not only has to review it, but give a report to Congress, and then the Senate and the House have oversight also. So we did this, and that was very relevant and very important. Those are major changes in the bill. But we even went one step further. In this bill, there are only 5 areas where it can be used. Dealing with cyber issues generally, dealing with cyber problems or abuse of cyber, dealing with protecting someone's health or life, and dealing with child pornography or child molestation. And the 5th element in the bill was national security. Now, the privacy groups had a problem that saying national security is too broad. And Mike and I had some negotiation, but we eventually felt, okay, we're trying to reach out to the privacy groups. Even though we feel our bill does protect privacy, we're going to try to go further to do whatever we can. And so we took out the issue of national security, and I know that privacy groups were very happy about that because they thought that was too broad. But what happened, because we felt we could cover national security by affecting health, welfare, and life. So we made a lot of changes in this bill, and now we're before you. I know there are a lot of amendments, but the one issue, too, and Mike alluded to it with Jan Schakowsky. Is she here? Well, she was there. She is. And Jan and a lot of people, Adam Schiff, had a problem with the fact that the perception, and I agree with them on this, you can't have a perception in our country that the government is in control of this issue of privacy. It had to be the civil side. And so we have an amendment that Mike or whoever's going to introduce it that basically says that point of entry now, the first contact, is going to be Homeland Security. Our bill did not speak to that, which we really said, administration, you make the decision. We're specifically now, to go even another step further, to deal with the issue, because we're dealing with perceptions, not reality, to have that amendment, I would hope that you consider, and we pass that here today. So I think we probably open up to questions. I've been talking about this bill for many years. It has to pass now. I make an analogy. It's like if you're a weather forecaster and you see Sandy coming up the East Coast, you can't warn anybody. Well, those of us, not many, who've been dealing with this cyber issue, we're getting attacked every day. $400 billion pursuant to Cyber Command have been stolen from our country. Jobs, just think of the amount of jobs within the last 2 years. Destructive attacks. We're very concerned about, especially Iran. Reports have said that Iran attacked Aramco, one of the biggest oil companies from Saudi Arabia. They shut down 30,000 of their employees. Our banks have been hit. Citibank, Bank of America, probing type hits. And there's no reason why a country like Iran can't come and shut down a bank. So it's important that we get the camel's nose in the tent, that the Senate passes a bill, and then some of these other issues then can be resolved in conference. But we have to move, and we have to move now. We should learn from sequestration, how we both aren't moving. We're not giving and looking at what's best, a macro issue. And we can't do that with this, because not only is it money and jobs, but it could cost lives if there's a destructive attack that could affect our country. So I'll stop here now, and thank you for having me here, and I guess we'll be open for questions.
Thank you very much. In fact, I do have a question. Perhaps it's a scenario, and the scenario is one that happened yesterday. And yesterday, our not only local law enforcement but federal law enforcement was faced with a circumstance where they were trying to discover more about what had happened, who did it, and what else may be out there. And if you would just tell me the current circumstance that law enforcement is operating under versus what this would do, is there any example that you could give me that this bill gave law enforcement a better feeling about what they were doing, the ability to go do something, or the tools in the hands of the street agents to effectively combat a terror, what might be called a terrorist attack against the United States, or at least trying to determine that. This deals nothing necessarily with a cyber attack against us, although they may be put together. I'm talking about gaining information and working together. Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, one of the things that doesn't happen now is because the National Security Agency and the CIA and other intelligence agencies do not monitor domestic networks. They do not. And so they might be unaware of a very sophisticated cyber threat that is going after a particular business. And the benefit of this is that our intelligence services have have identified significantly more cyber threats than is known in the public. Significantly more. And so two things can happen. They can now, under this bill, which they are prohibited from now, say we're going to share with you in a classified way, your internet service providers likely and others, once they get the classification, so that you can protect your networks. In other words, those zeros and ones in a really ugly, nasty pattern that do bad things to your system would be stopped before it gets there, much the same way that those systems try to stop spam and other things in their system already. If you know what pattern you're looking for, you can find it. So they would say, here, look at this. The other benefit is now, and this is all 100% voluntary, by the way. Nobody is forced to do this, not one person. And there are protections in the bill to make sure there's no coercion used to force companies to cooperate. But if a company gets hit with something pretty nasty and it's happening in real time, machine to machine, they can kick out that malicious source code and share it back. So not only the government will say, ooh, that is nasty. We're going to go, if it's overseas, our NSA will use it to go try to figure out who did it. If it's domestic, the FBI would take it and try to figure out where it's coming from domestically. And currently that doesn't happen. So you can't robustly build your defenses domestically without that sharing arrangement. And again, it wouldn't make any sense to try to build sensors around the country. A, we wouldn't allow it. You don't want your military on our internet, number one. But number two, we can much more cost effectively just share description of bad guys. Yeah, that's what we do that now.
And then they can decide whether they would choose to participate.
Yeah, and if they don't want to do that, if they just want to defend off their attacker, the nation state of China, they can do that. Or they can share it with the government and say, boy, this is nasty. Can you help me try to figure out how I stop this? That's the beautiful thing about it. And if they don't want to share, they do not have to share.
Ms. Ruth.
Let me give you examples just of situations that can occur if, in fact, we don't deal with this cyber threat. When it's been reported that when Russia attacked Georgia, they cyber attacked them. They shut down their communication systems. They shut down their ability to use their technology. They weren't able to get their equipment moving. I mean, this is just an example of what cyber attacks are. The future of war probably will be in space and cyber. I know that until recently, our academies, West Point Air Force and the Naval Academy, weren't really focused on these cyber attacks. Now they're 100% focused on learning about cyber attacks and how they're being used. We know, for instance, an example domestically, but in the United States, that before we were really on our game and NSA became one of the best in the world, we have millions of dollars of our space secrets, or our classified information in our space program. Whatever we do in law enforcement, we're being cyber attacked. We have more attacks occurring every day. I was out in Silicon Valley working the bill with all the companies last week, and I had an individual with one of the national credit card companies saying, we get about 4,000 to 5,000 cyber attacks a day, and they're probing. Again, a lot of it China. But air traffic control systems, critical infrastructure, which, by the way, we're weaker in critical infrastructure because we don't have the people working in that realm that the banks have and their security groups and all of that. So this is a future area. There's nothing of a stopping Al-Qaeda hiring a really good attacker and having an attack. Remember, the terrorists they're not going to win the war, they're going to win the battle. They're going to disrupt, They're going to try to maim, kill, whatever they need to do to attack us because they don't like who we are and what we are.
One last question. Yes, sir.
Why this is so important, people don't realize how it would affect me at home. It sounds like cyber warriors fighting cyber warriors. If you have an attack like happened, the public reports talking about the Saudi Aramco company where they destroyed data on 30,000 machines, computers, servers, destroyed that data, so you know it's not about rebooting it, you can't get access to it. Imagine if someone showed up at the bank and they were successful enough to take that kind of attack and hit a financial institution. The bank wouldn't be able to tell you how much money you had in the bank, and you wouldn't be able to verify how much money you had in the bank. You want to talk about chaos.
Or Wall Street, too.
Yeah.
Wall Street
I mean, the implications of this are huge, dangerous, and the threat is growing.
The Statement of Administrative Policy, meaning the SAP from the White House, has arrived. Have either of you had a chance to digest that yet? I have received it, but not had a chance
I have it. I haven't
digest it.
read the whole thing, Mr. Chairman. I have to tell you, we were both incredibly disappointed. We've been working with the administration. They had 5 areas of concern. 3 they're basically getting outright, and 2 we've made improvements on. I do not believe that the administration knows how to work with a legislative body. We have come a long way to some of their points. If you want to work in a positive, constructive dialogue, which we have clearly demonstrated we have done in this bill, you don't issue a veto threat because you don't get everything you want. It's flabbergasting to me that they think that this would help them in their cause to move the piece of legislation forward. The good news is members are in tune and working through this issue, our issue. The administration is probably going to be sidelined in the House here, but we're also working with the Senate on a bill, and you can't understand the threat and not feel morally obligated to do something about it. We are in a cyber war, and we're losing. Candidly, I thought this was amateur hour.
I'm disappointed because we've been working very closely with the administration. Just yesterday, Mike and I had about an hour meeting with the Chief of Staff, Dennis McDonough. He put out a release that he thanked us for working together. We're getting a long way trying to resolve these issues. I assume the White House feels that they want to reserve some of their positions that I don't agree with. Hopefully when we pass our bill, it goes to the Senate. But the bottom line is that the President eventually has to sign a bill. So I'm willing to work through issues. Our highest priority right now is to maintain the votes that we have. Our vote count shows that we can pass the bill at this point. We had the same SAP threat the last time we were able to pass the bill. But, we have to have the Senate. We have to have the administration. So, I'm going to move on, and I'm going to told McDonough in my conversation that we're going to keep working with you. The threats are so severe. We need to move, and we need to move fast.
I want to thank both of you. We're not getting ready to excuse you, but just my few minutes here. I want to thank both of you for not only taking the time to keep me updated during the year, as both of you have, but for you continually staying at the table. I think that the worthiness of your effort will yield good things. I think it's important that we work together. I think go back to the testimony you gave, Chairman Rogers, where you said that Director Moeller and others who have a direct firsthand knowledge of the appliances of the trade of trying to steal American secrets, that he's for us working together and having resolve. I well remember the days when my father served as FBI director, that there were many, many issues that he sometimes felt isolated in, that he saw a threat that perhaps others, for policy or political consequences, had a different expediency model to it. And I would just say to you that both of you see this the same way. I recognize this, and I appreciate both of you taking the time, being prepared, and to provide us with your best content. Thank you.
And I can say that your father had at least one very good field agent when he was director. At least one.
My father would say that this guy, Mike Rogers, who was from Chicago, was an exceptional young man and the service to our country, perhaps more importantly.
Could I address that, Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
I always tell Mike that all good FBI agents must listen to their prosecutors. I was a former prosecutor, even if we're in the minority. So,
Well, federal prosecutors, as you know, are on the front line day to day, serving this great nation. And
Saw that in Texas, right?
I don't need to tell anybody in this room we're faced with the gentleman, Mr. Barton, who is in attendance today, Chairman Barton, and gentleman Mike Burgess, recognized that in around North Texas, we're faced with the murder of 3 people, 2 directly associated with law enforcement and a wife. And it is unconscionable that we would not do our very best, just as if it happened in Boston, too. So thank you very much. You're very timely, and thank you very much. Chairman Cole.
I really don't have any questions, just a quick comment. First of all, thank you both for what you're doing. I think it's extraordinarily important, and it's been done in a bipartisan way. And, Chairman, I'm reading the administration statement, and I see here that only the advisors will recommend a veto. Usually the top guy's smarter than the people that advise him, so maybe
we can only hope.
In this case, I'm putting my money on the president, and I do think it's a clumsy legislative tool, but leaves enough room open if we actually get something done and it comes out in a bipartisan way that I suppose you all will continue to keep working on this. But this is really an important issue, and it's one where you have done the Congress great credit by working together across the aisle, trying to come to an agreement and keeping the door open with the administration, and we're going to get there in the end because you're both exceptional legislators. So I just thank you. It's a real service. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Chairman Cole. I appreciate your time, not only to be here to hear this important data, but your participation in that. No questions. Mr. Woodall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had one question, knowing how hard you all have both been working to address everyone's privacy concerns and make it a voluntary system where no one is compelled to participate. If I'm that person back home and I feel particularly threatened by my information, even the possibility of my information being shared, can I craft a contract with my provider that guarantees that they will never share my information, even in an effort to stop cyber threats, or does the exemption in the bill, does the national security interest in the bill of having this information shared always take precedence over the privacy contract I might have with my provider?
Well, your privacy contract would prohibit that company from sharing that they may or may not have. I don't know if you would, if you're a phone user, I doubt that they'll entertain individual contracts 100 million times over. They're not going to do that. But you do sign a contract that has protection provisions in it now, depending on the company. Right. Number one. And I would rest assured in a different way. So what happens is that, again, this is not a surveillance bill. So a lot of people have a misconception that this is about content, that they're looking for words in your email that say terrorism or bomb or fill in the blank. None of that happens. And I want this need to be very clear. What happens is your service provider already is trying to screen things from getting to their computer. Spam, malicious code, right? They have big filters, and they try to stop that thing from going through. And the best way I've heard it described is if that cup was going down the river, and it's a river, but it looks something's wrong with it. And so they can see that through zeros and ones in an odd configuration. They don't know what's in the cup. They have no idea what the cup's made of. But they can see, this is your provider now, see something that doesn't look right. So they would take that cup and kick it out. They do this today. So they look at it and kick it out and go, ooh, that's bad. I don't, nobody wants that. And according to the contract, I can do that. Then if it's very sophisticated and nasty, you want to make sure that this thing doesn't get through anywhere. So under this, it would allow them to send it to the government. Here's the important part. There is a filter on there that would take away any PII. So any personal identifying information is gone. Now it gets into where the government can look at it, and they don't need that anyway. They need the pattern to see where did it come from. Is it China? Is it Iran? Is it North Korea? If it's Cleveland, then that automatically goes to the FBI, right? And they still don't need your PII at this point at all. So, and in order to make sure that happens, the PII portion of that happens, there are 4 different layers now of protection. So we have an inspector general that reviews this and has to mandatory reports to Congress once a year. We can ask for more. There is something called the PCLOB. I always get it wrong. The Privacy PCLOB, Privacy Civil Liberties Oversight Board. Thank you. That was empowered by Congress to look at these very types of issues. They also are doing a review and oversight. Then we empowered the different department privacy officers also in this to do privacy oversight. So if I'm NSA and I get it, there is a privacy person specific to the agency. Now you have PCLOB looking at it. Then you have the IG, and you also have all of those reports come to the relevant committees in Congress. That is 4 layers of oversight to make sure that your PII is handled correctly. And what happens is they kick it out and destroy it. This happens today when we already have a system that handles this. So for someone who's worried about their personal information or the content of their emails, it just doesn't happen, and it can't work that way. What it is, it's a machine really talking to a machine, and it's looking for that pattern. All the rest of the water in the river keeps on moving, and that one gets kicked out only because it had the right pattern, the right zeros and ones in the right pattern for that to get kicked out. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does, and I think that comforts folks a great deal. But whenever you see liability protection, you wonder, what is it you're protecting folks from? What is the liability they would have otherwise had, given all of those protections that are systemic in this bill, given that I'm going to sign a contract with my telephone company who's not going to make a private contract for me. They're going to have a blanket contract for everyone. If this bill does not trump my current contract with my provider, if all of these protections are in place for me, what is the nature of the protection that a company gets from me, the consumer? I can understand why you need antitrust protection. I don't want Comcast and AT&T to get sideways with each other. But at the end of the day, what is the protection in this bill that a company gets from a lawsuit from their customer?
Yeah. It is, the whole liability protection is based on the assumption that, first of all, this is not mandatory. We're asking that business, basically, to cooperate. And think of it this way. These are victims of crimes. Right? Nation states are getting into your network. And by the way, you want your service provider. You ask Norton and McAfee and Comcast and all those. You ask them every day. You say, please keep this stuff out. Right? Well, they're not as good as a nation state is. Eventually, some stuff gets through. And they're not looking for that type of code anyway, right, necessarily. And so what we said is, how do we entice you without the government mandating your participation, which would mean we would set the rules and the standards of the Internet, which I think is an awful idea. You do not want the government setting mandates and standards for private sector and what those systems look like. I think that's a disaster, and you'd kill the Internet. So what we said is we want to protect the free and open Internet. How do we get you? You have no business incentive to do this. You don't have any business incentive to report a crime. How do I get you to report a crime and do it in real time? You know, kick that thing out and send it to me so we can go to China, Iran, and Russia and figure out who this is and what they're doing and why it's so bad. Excuse me. And so in order for them to participate, you have to give them the protection that, listen, if I'm doing this in good faith, you can't sue me. And it's not about allowing me not to get sued. You also have to make sure that I don't have a line of 100 people out there looking for settlements so I don't get sued. Right? Otherwise, they're just going to say, no, I'm not going to participate. That's the whole purpose of the liability protection. And again, we surrounded the other side of that with all of the privacy protections. So we're asking you, you're a victim of a crime, please dial 911, please get that to the right authorities so they can deal with it. And by the way, we're going to build in all these severe 4-layer deep protections to make sure that your personal identifying information is in there. And the good news is it's not likely that your email is probably a configured piece of it's called a pack. I don't know if you want to get into all this technical stuff, but it's a packet of information. The only way it would even be yours is if they have figured out a way to embed something in your PII, which is, unfortunately not out of their own possibility. It's just not very likely to happen.
Yeah, one other issue, too, beyond all that Mike talked about, we also have added to the bill now 100% minimization. Minimization being that you'll take out any personal information if it does slip through. What's going through really are zeros and ones. But assuming that it does go through, then you have 100% minimization. That's an amendment that we're asking to be approved today. It's like as if, an example, if someone's sending you an anthrax letter and you see that something's wrong with this letter and you call the authorities, you call the government's not looking to see what the content of the letter is. The government's looking to see how to deal with the issue of anthrax. It's the same type of situation. This is such a serious issue because of the constant threats. If we knew Iran was coming over with a bomb to bomb us, we'd take care of it. We know we're being attacked on a regular basis. $400 billion of personal, of business information that has been stolen from this country. Attacking banks. And just look what happened in South Korea just a week ago, where they were able, and North Korea is not that sophisticated in cyber, knocked out the biggest bank. What happens, Bank of America or Citicorp or whatever, just think to run on the money, will people feel their money secure? So we have to act now. We have to move forward as quickly as we can, get the Senate to move, and hopefully the White House will come together with us and we'll find a way to pass a bill.
And to be clear, as I think as the chairman said, there's no incentive for folks to participate if they think they might get into trouble. This is not a favor that you're doing for industry that's being attacked. This is a matter of national security.
People try to sell this as some kind of benefit to them. That's not necessarily. They're a victim of a crime. You wouldn't put the burden on the victim in any criminal investigation. I don't know why we would start with this.
The three people that deal with this issue more than anything: Secretary Napolitano, Homeland Security, Director of FBI Mueller, and Chief General Alexander, head of the NSA. Those three have all said that if we don't have participation between government and business, and if we don't have information sharing between those two, we cannot protect our country. And right now, we're not protected. All three have said that within the last 2 weeks.
I thank you both. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and their efforts on behalf of our country and those of us that serve here in the U.S. Congress. I would, in advance, Mr. Chairman, advocate the Schakowsky Amendment number 23, where she's joined with Representatives Schiff, Thompson, Jackson, Lee, DeGette, Polis, and also the Schiff Amendment, where he's joined with a number of others, including Rush Holt. I served with most of the members that are members of the Intelligence Committee at some point, and there are a lot of new ones that I didn't have the pleasure of serving with. But one thing I know is all of the people, including the ones that I've mentioned, have approached not only this issue, but all issues having to do with intelligence in a comprehensive manner. One of the things that happens, Mr. Chairman, is this is an extremely complex area of our overall societal interests. And in the balancing of liberties versus security, nothing could be highlighted greater than in the area of cybersecurity. I had the good fortune of participating last year with the German Marshall Fund in Brussels, and many of the subject matters that were ongoing at that conference dealt with the concern of cybersecurity. So to disabuse some, America isn't the only place that has a vital concern about cybersecurity. The one measure that causes me, particularly if we get an opportunity to debate the two amendments and others that I would reference, that draws me to this measure favorably, is the fact that it sunsets. And had I been on the committee, while most people advocate for 5-year sunset periods, which this one does, and I would have ultimately supported the 5-year. But here's an example of something, and I've said to Chairman Rogers and to the ranking member, that this is just the beginning of an ongoing process that we're going to have to be dealing with in our society for some time to come. And the sooner we come to grips with the harsh reality, not just of nation states or rogues, but even our children who are advanced sitting up in garages can accidentally cause serious problems, which also is something that I advocate for purposes of drawing people into government, and that is that the younger that we can get these people interested in the positive aspects of what happens, the less likely we are to see them showing up bringing down the whole internet on a given day. So I strongly urge that those of us that are older be mindful that people that are growing up in today's society that will be 10 years from now know a hell of a lot more about this technology than most of us do sitting up here. I only raise that for the reason that we have the constant talk about salaries, and rightly so. But here is an area where we had best be about the business of trying to attract the brightest and the best in our society. I appreciate you all. I don't have any questions. I'll have a lot to say about this tomorrow, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman, and let me concur with his comments. I do believe that this will be a regular occurrence, that we will deal with this on an ongoing basis, and certainly the one part which I think the testimony from both of our witnesses has pointed to, and that is personal data and information is taken out. It's who it's from and who it's to and what it's intended to do. And personal data is very important to me, too. And I want to recognize that I think, as Judge Hastings has noted, that the ability that we have to effectively deal with this on an ongoing basis means that we will, in fact, do that. I thank the gentleman.
You don't have security if you don't have privacy.
Well, it's very, to surrender either would be bad. Gentleman, Mr. Nugent.
Well, I thank both of you for what you've done, and particularly that you work together in a very bipartisan way, obviously in a very open process within your committee, trying to protect us. And I just got assigned Armed Services Committee in emerging threats. And obviously, can't talk about the classified issues, but it is so important what you're doing. And particularly, I think some of those actors today that weren't even on the radar a year and a half ago, nation states, that so quickly they can move from I guess from the Stone Age to this age and then interrupt us in such a way. But I agree with the ranking member that privacy you can't trump privacy, and privacy has to be the number one issue that we have as we move forward. You just don't abandon that. You know that from your experience in the FBI, and I know that from 38 years in law enforcement, that that's what we're about, to protect people's constitutional rights and their privacy, to keep government from interfering and going into their daily lives. So I just want to thank both of you. I have no questions. Thank you so much.
Can I just a quick comment to that, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for bringing that up. The problem with these new nation states is that they're growing their capability, but there's a term called spillover, where things propagate beyond their control. So they're dangerous, but they're not great at it. And so our fear is if they decide to launch that attack thinking they're going to limit it in scope, it propagates beyond its original intent and causes far more damage. And that's why it's so important that we believe that we get to a sharing regimen here as quickly as we can to stop that problem. And, talking nation states like North Korea, Iran, who are non-rational actors when it comes to this kind of thing, who are eager to cause America trouble, may cause more trouble than they even intend at the end of the day. That's what's so concerning about that.
Thank you so very much. Yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Polis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a number of concerns about the language in the bill. Obviously, at a 20,000-foot level, we all agree that there are cyber dangers to our private sector, to our public sector. A lot of the testimony today and a lot of the information that's out there is about the danger. So, I think we agree there's a danger. However, we want to make sure that we don't create a danger to the Internet ecosystem, the engine of innovation that has created jobs and enriched our culture, as collateral damage in a misdirected effort to reduce the threats. Particularly, I think there's a set of amendments that I hope are made in order that really the way that this current language reads, it affects the sanctity of contract along tradition in Anglo-Saxon law. And I want to kind of walk through this with the chair to make sure that I fully understand what this does. But basically, if many companies will enter a contract with their user. That's the user agreement. That's a terms of use. In that, they will then say what they can and can't do with the information. It may say we can share it with everybody in the world and make it public, and if you agree to that, that's wonderful. It might say we will not share your information. There's always a carve-out if required by law. If it's required under the normal system of law, it can be, of course, attained with the right legal safeguards. What this would basically do is effectively nullify that contract. You'd have, again, let's say a company said, we will not share your information with the government, with the federal government. They enter that with you. You say, I agree. You sign your name to it. They then actually receive an indemnification for sharing that information with the government. And in accordance with the section. Now, what are the reasons what can the federal government do with that information? There's also pulling in things that are totally unrelated to cybersecurity. So we have cybersecurity, yes, investigation and prosecution of cybercrimes, yes, but then we get into things that have nothing to do with cybersecurity, like protection of individuals from the dangers of death or serious bodily harm. I mean, that's like skydiving or scuba diving, or it could be organizing gun shows. I mean, you have in here, we took out firearm sales records, but the government can still use this. If the government gets in their mind they want to investigate gun show operators, they can then use the information to investigate gun shows because those, guns can cause serious bodily harm. Football can cause serious bodily harm. I mean, why are we even, I guess the first question is, and we'll get to the first, why are we even pulling in things totally unrelated to cybersecurity, relating to danger of death or serious bodily harm, relating to serious threats to the safety of minors. Again, football is a serious threat to the safety of minors. Like, what do these things even have to do with cybersecurity, and why are we having them in this bill versus, look, if we need to improve safety of these things, why not do something in judiciary and look at that separately? But the question to the chair is, what do these other things have to even do with cybersecurity?
Sure. And first of all, 1/6 of our economy now is the Internet. You're probably more aware of that than most. If you want to protect the confidence in the economic benefits and commercial enterprise of the Internet, we better do something and do it soon. As I said before, there has been an unprecedented probing. Public reports talk about an unprecedented probing on our financial institutions by a nation state looking to do harm. So if you do your banking online and you show up one day and let's just say they're successful, and I will tell you that thank God, nobody better in the world than our financial institutions at doing this because they've been trying to keep people out of their system.
No, but we're clearing my time.
No. Let me
okay, you'll get to the bodily harm part.
I'll get there. But it's important. I'm answering I'm answering to your statement and your question, sir. And so if you don't do something and people start losing the confidence that the Internet actually functions, so I disagreed with the premise of your question. This is the only bill that's 100% voluntary, does not get the government involved in the Internet, requires no new surveillance on the Internet. Period. End of story. It's all voluntary. Now, the other things, and these were agreements, candidly, by discussions we had with privacy groups on what would happen, and let me give you an example. If there is a picture that is in there, and if you know technology well, you can embed bad things in those pictures digitally. And it flies off because the private sector company sees something in there that says, this doesn't look right, there's something's wrong with this. It hits the filter, all the PII is stripped out, right, so they don't get PII. None of that happens, and when they get in and they look at it and now they find out that this is an effort from China to do something bad. And as they do their forensics on it, they realize that that's a child, and it's child pornography. They have used child pornography to embed malicious source code to get to where they're going. Do we or do we not have a moral obligation to try to find that child and take that child out of harm's way? I would argue, as a law enforcement guy, I better hope so, because I know there's a mom looking for that child, and I know there's a dad out there looking for the child. Now, Some have argued to strip it all out. That's the same thing we did prior to 9/11, where we built up these walls and these things about you can't, even if you see it, you can't talk about it. And the reason we narrowed that list pretty significantly.
I mean, what if there's information about somebody who is organizing a gun show in there? Again, I didn't bring up the part about child
ridiculous. You're talking about.
Why is it ridiculous? What if we have an administration that doesn't like gun shows?
That's you're giving an example that doesn't exist. This is a machine to a machine, right? That's looking for source code, or malicious source code in a pattern.
Be a graphic that advertises a gun show that doesn't have its local permits in order. Should that be then?
That's not what the bill says. As a matter of fact, the bill prohibits any further investigative on that. And so I see what you're doing. You're trying to interject fear into the notion that the government is looking at these things. But candidly, and you know better than most, sir, that when you're talking at hundreds of millions of times per second, and you're looking of patterns and zeros and ones, it's a machine talking to a machine. That's what we have here. And what they're doing is taking that pattern and kicking it out of their system. And they do this, by the way, already. And if they don't, God forbid what you get on your home computer, right? That's why you pay them, and that's why they charge you, is to also try, as part of their package, is to try to keep stuff off your computer. The problem is now we have nation states playing in this game, and they can't stop it all. As I said when I started, I don't know if you heard that the federal government has identified far more, I think the number is classified, but far more than the number of sophisticated threats that have been identified by what your ISP would recognize as the public domain. So they don't know that stuff exists. We do. Shouldn't we be sharing it? I argue if I know that someone's going to kick in your door tomorrow night with a knife and come after you, and I know that as a law enforcement officer, I am morally obligated to do something about it. What we're saying is, hey, let's do this. We're all protected by this.
So, again, you've said a couple times no one is forced to do this. It's 100% voluntary. The one the one that you're referring to, no company is forced to do this. However, again, there are users who have given their information to the company with the explicit assurance under the terms of use that it would not be shared with the government. It's involuntary for them. Again, can't a company, if this were to become law, and the terms of use that a company entered into with a user said, we will not share this information with the government, wouldn't they be completely exonerated from any risk of liability as long as they fulfilled the exemptions from liability clauses under Section 4, which is information to the government?
Which is cyber threat information. If there is cyber threat information embedded in your
cyber threats everywhere. I mean, you also said that there's cyber threats everywhere, and there are. I mean, the number of hacking attempts that any company has. I mean, e-commerce companies I've had, hundreds a day, thousands a day. So, I mean, it's ubiquitous. So everything can relate to a cyber threat. Doesn't mean it's it could be any type of cyber threat. So again,
but what you're arguing is they would have some business model to violate a contract with an individual and voluntarily violate the contract. I mean, if you believe the company,
the customer doesn't even have to be informed.
Doing the contracts,
the customer doesn't have to be informed that the information is given to the government. And we talk about confidence and the desire not to hurt the confidence. This directly hurts the confidence of Internet users. Internet users, if this were to become law, would be much more hesitant to provide their personal information, even if assured under the terms of use that it will be kept personal, because the company would be completely indemnified if they voluntarily gave it to the United States government. So, I mean, I see this is why many members of the Internet ecosystem, people associated with technology, view this bill as a confidence reduction, not a confidence increase. It actually reduces people's confidence. Specifically because of the federal use of information, again, which is not limited to cybersecurity, but includes serious bodily harm or danger of death, which again it could be eating pizza. I mean, anything can cause death or bodily harm. They're very, very broad, and there's complete indemnification for the company that shares that information, even in violation of its own terms of use, which is why. Again, many members of the Internet community see this as something that would reduce confidence in the Internet ecosystem rather than increase confidence. There's no disagreement about the general points about the dangers of hackers, the dangers of cybersecurity. Of course, there's a problem there, but I don't see when this gets into things like physical and bodily harm, when there's a, look, like why not have, and I think there might have been some amendments over, why not have language where if a company wants to get help, if they think that they might want help, why not disclose in their terms of use that they may share this information with the government for purposes of cybersecurity? And then that's between a company and its users. How does that not work if that's something the companies do?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to debate contract law with you. I disagree fundamentally. I think that there's a little theatrical whipping up of things that are just candidly not going to happen based on the technology that we're using. Again, zeros and ones, hundreds of millions of times a second in patterns. It has nothing to do with content, nothing. And that's where I think you're getting a bit askew. Now, however, again, the argument was, well, what happens, and this was organized by, or actual language that was debated and taken with privacy groups last year. Dutch and I sat down for bills last year, and this is the language they came up with. And so we took their language.
Which language?
The exceptions on the rule. So we narrowed the list significantly, but what we didn't want to do is say, my God, if you know that somebody is going to be suffering bodily harm, and the odds of this, by the way, are pretty tiny anyway, right? But if it was, and it was you, and we had that information, wouldn't you want them to stop some bodily harm? I would argue you would. Just like when you serve a warrant on a house for drugs and you find a load of machine guns in the basement, guess what? That's still something you get to take. The judge can help you there. And so my argument is, I mean, you're arguing in the extremes that will not happen. It only happens if it feeds the fuel of, well, somebody's sitting down and reading an email and then passing it on to the government. That is not, if that is what happens here, this is a complete and utter failure. Because that's not how it works.
Why wouldn't it work? Again, to leave it up, getting back to the contract part, and I think there might be a series of amendments to do this. If a company feels, if it's voluntary for companies, which I mean you've indicated a number of times, why not allow them the discretion to enter agreements with their customers that would allow them to share the information? And if they choose to enter those, they share it. And if they choose not to, maybe other customers will sign up knowing that it won't be shared with the government, and then they know that there might be a higher risk of some type of cybersecurity
I think those
infraction.
companies should make those choices on their own. They develop their own contracts. I think they should develop their own contracts. They should enforce their own contracts in the way they do in civil law. I don't know why we want to get into that business. And number two, by the way, this is important, that TechNet, the very companies that you say are uncomfortable with this, support this bill. The Silicon Valley CEOs support this bill. The people who are in the business of prosperity on the Internet think this is the right approach.
I mean,
so people on the Internet, if you're, a 14-year-old tweeter in the basement, took my nephew, I had to work him over a lot on this bill because he didn't understand the mechanics of it. I hear that a lot. Once you understand the threat and you understand the mechanics of how it works, and you understand that people are not monitoring your content of your emails, most people go, got it, I'm in.
Having talked to a number of executives of some of the leading tech companies, I would express their opinions of this bill as largely ambivalent. Many of them feel it's fairly irrelevant because they feel they're better equipped to deal with threats to cybersecurity than our government, and they find the notion somewhat absurd that they would even do this with our government. They say in fact believe there should be a flow of ideas the other way from the private sector to the government, so that we can catch up with many of the leading cybersecurity techniques.
We want that to happen.
Well, we can agree on that. And actually, some of the bills that we just passed on suspension facilitate that flow of ideas and the link between the private sector and the government as well. This bill is obviously more from the government to the private sector. Look, there's no disagreement. There is some need for information sharing.
Yeah.
I agree. You agree. I think when you get into things that can include everything from football to gun show organizing, you're really far afoul of what field of what.
Again, that's just so outrageous. There's nothing in here about sports or football. You have to. It has to be a cyber threat, number one. Yeah. And if in the course of obtaining that cyber threat, there's threat embedded in something that would lead you to come to another conclusion, yes.
But can't football cause serious bodily harm?
I think that's just ridiculous.
Well, it has. I mean, there's kids that are injured, there's adults that are injured.
But how does that relate to cybersecurity information?
Well, then take it out of the bill, and we're,
Or there's no football in there.
We have for cybersecurity. I'm looking at it again, section 6.1.
We're arguing about things that just aren't in the bill.
Cybersecurity purposes. 6.1b for investigation and prosecution of cybersecurity fines. That's cybersecurity. Then you get into C for protection of individuals from the danger of death or serious bodily harm. I mean, the bits and bytes, these ones and zeros, those don't cause serious bodily harm. We're talking about cybersecurity, and then with another clause, and again, there is proposed amendments that change this as well, you can take that out, and then you still have cybersecurity in there, and there's no question that football is not in it, and, skydiving
Rest
is not in
assured,
it.
sir, football is not in it. And you, of all folks in the technical side, understand how this works, and I would, again, encourage you, and if you're not comfortable with it, please let us take you down in the spaces. I don't know if I saw you at one of the cyber briefs. Love to walk you through what the threat is and how we handle it and how all of your concerns are alleviated in this bill. That's why it's been such a collaborative effort over 2 years to address people's concerns. And I'll guarantee you, if you can find football in this bill, I will, I'm not sure what I'll do, but it'll be really quite fantastic.
Well, to the extent that football can cause serious bodily harm, it is absolutely included in this bill. Again, there's no disagreement about the threat. There's no disagreement that we need a response. I think we just have a disagreement about what that response is. And with that, I'll yield back.
And I appreciate it. And again, that's why TechNet and all of the companies who do this for a living think this is the right approach. And I would thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate the conversation. I think one of the points that is to be made is that this committee tries to satisfy itself on a broad range of issues that come before us. And both of you as witnesses have done very well to make sure that you take this committee at face value. The gentleman, Mr. Polis, comes from a tech background, and I believe you do recognize that. And I believe he's trying to make sure he understands the bill clearly, and for both of you to amplify that in a professional way, and the gentleman to ask his questions is part of the beauty of this Rules Committee and the process that ensues therein. And so I thank the gentleman very much.
I appreciate it. I hope you'll take us up on that offer. We'd love to have you down there.
You guys go to a football game together.
Is that in the bill or out of the bill?
Naked drag racing is not in the bill either, for the record.
Yeah, we know where you are. Mr. Webster. I had seen Mrs. Roz Layton and the chairwoman. I do not see at this time unless she's not here. Gentleman, Dr. Burgess, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Rogers, I can remember an Energy and Commerce hearing probably in 2006 where some information came to light about something that was on a Department of Energy hard drive. We had to rapidly adjourn and go into a super secret location to continue the discussion. I remember thinking at the time, this is a problem that is so serious we ought to address it or we're going to get caught and something bad is going to happen and we'll have our hand on the switch and we'll be criticized. And now here we are 7 years later, and there have been lots of classified briefings, many put on by yourself and Mr. Ruppersberger, and thank you for that. But I still worry that the day of reckoning is just out there and we're still vulnerable. I really appreciate the discussion you just had with Mr. Polis. Let's fix whatever the problem is and let's move this thing along to get the protection because the consequences of not defending our nation are going to be serious. Now, I guess I really do not understand why the President, I mean, it looks like you really have bent over backwards to address this privacy issue and stripping out of personal information. Why does the President feel you haven't done the work there? Did he talk with, I mean, did the administration weigh in with the committee? Did they provide you information? Did you provide them with information?
Oh, clearly. We've worked fairly diligently with both Dutch and I have worked with the White House. As he said, over the last 2 weekends, we've had conversations with the White House and trying to find answers to questions here. They had 5 buckets. 3 we have answered outright, and 2 we've moved, but we didn't get where exactly they wanted. And again, I was disappointed. We're going to continue to move forward. I am highly suspect. I think Mr. Cole pointed out very astutely. This is a recommendation from policy advisors to veto, so it's not the President saying he will veto. We get this bill to the President's desk. He knows what the threats are. We all now know what the threats are. He'll sign this bill.
Well, I'll just say as a practical matter, if the President opposes it, it makes it easier to support it in my district. But nevertheless, I do think it would be better.
Well, we did pick up a few more Republican votes just today. It was really
I do think it would be better if we worked through these problems because there's no Democrat or Republican here. This could affect all of us in a very profound and negative way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else on the committee that would seek time before this existing panel? I want to thank you on behalf of the Rules Committee. I want to thank both of you not only for your commitment to the national security issues that you have a sworn oath to protect, but also to the membership of this body, your ability to effectively represent all the various thoughts that we have, the ability to thoughtfully work with an administration and the directors of those agencies that deal firsthand on these issues to make sure that they are comprehended and well understood. I am very much a voice of everyone on this committee, and I would say that we do need to understand what we are agreeing to, that it needs to be well understood by a street agent who is effectively trying to catch a perpetrator, to know the limits of what the law is and the spirit of the law, but also to make sure that in the lowest level that they feel like that the hard work that they put in would yield perhaps even a nugget of information that might save this great nation and its people from harm. And both of those come with a balance, and both of those come through your hard work. So on behalf of this committee, I want to thank both of you for taking time.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the opportunity. And by the way, I just wanted to extend that opportunity to, and I just didn't mean for Mr. Polis, any member of the committee that wanted to come down for that, we would make arrangements.
Thank you very much. And you're now excused from the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next panel that I'd like to have come up would include the gentleman, the former chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, the gentleman, Mr. Barton, the gentlewoman, Ms. Schakowsky, the gentleman, Mr. Franks, and the gentleman, Mr. Schiff. And I would ask that we would put these 4 chairs up. There's one right back where, Doug, if you'll help them get one of those back chairs. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Schakowsky, I'm going to ask that you and Mr. Schiff do please join this panel. I want to thank all 4 of you who I have recognized been here since we started this hearing, and I know it's provided you an opportunity to gain firsthand knowledge of which you already had about the content of the bill, but you've taken time to be here for an intended reason. This committee is very thankful for your thoughtfulness to be here. As always, if you have any written comments that you'd like to present without objection, we will accept those. And we would ask for any summary of your information on the amendments that you'd wish to present to the committee. And I would first recognize the gentleman, the former chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, the gentleman, Mr. Barton from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the members of the Rules Committee. I'm glad to be here this afternoon. I have vested in my pension, waiting for the first panel to be questioned. I was able to skip a Keystone Pipeline markup because I was over here. So you have my undying gratitude. That's the 4th or 5th markup we've had on the Keystone Pipeline in the Energy and Commerce Committee in the last 2 years. I might also say it's good to see you as chairman, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
It's the first time I've testified before the Rules Committee in this Congress, and it's certainly good to see the chairman under Mr. Sessions. And it's well-deserved, and I'm sure you'll serve the country great. So.
Well, thank you very much. If the facts of the case were well stated, in fact, it's your fault that I'm here because it was the gentleman, Mr. Barton, who some 15 or 16 years ago acknowledged that I should be on the Rules Committee, and without objection, the Texas delegation agreed with that.
This is the heart of the Congress, right?
I remember well when you told me I would be here, and your leadership at that time as well as now is greatly appreciated.
I'll be brief because of my 3 esteemed colleagues. I did find it very interesting that most of the debate and discussion between the chairman and the ranking member of the committee was on the issue of how privacy is considered in the bill. I voted against the bill last year on the floor. I had a privacy amendment before the Rules Committee that was not agreed upon. So I spoke against the bill and voted against the bill on the floor of the House. Chairman Rogers and the ranking member have worked very diligently this year to include myself and Mr. Markey and others who consider privacy to be a key issue. I'm the co-chairman of the Privacy Caucus with Ed Markey of Massachusetts, and I am proud to say that the bill that's before the committee is a much improved bill in terms of privacy, thanks to Chairman Rogers and Mr. Rupesparger's concern about privacy. I'm also proud to say that the amendment I'm about to seek permission to offer on the floor has their support. It also has Ed Markey's support. Mr. Markey is not here today. He's up in Massachusetts because of pending Senate race plus what happened at the Boston Marathon, but he does support this amendment. My amendment would add a section to the bill at the very end, a new section 4, which simply says, and I'll read it because it's very brief, nothing in this act or the amendments made by this act shall be considered to provide new or alter any existing authority for an entity to sell personal information of a consumer to another entity for marketing purposes. So this is, again, an enhancement to the privacy protections that have been added to the bill since last year, and I hope the Rules Committee will find a unanimous vote on a bipartisan basis to make it in order to be offered on the floor. And I thank the committee's time.
Thank you very much. If the gentleman would stick around for a few minutes, I'd like to offer our committee an opportunity at least to engage on this issue. Mr. Schiff, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the amendment I'm offering today, along with Ms. Schakowsky, Ms. Eshu, Mr. Holton, Mr. Thompson of Mississippi. The amendment would require entities sharing information either with the government or with each other and enjoin the limitation on liability provided in the bill to make reasonable efforts to minimize personally identifiable information that can identify specific persons. In response to conversations with the private sector, the amendment also clarifies that reasonable efforts can include an automated process so that sharing can occur in real time. I share the goals of the chairman and ranking member to facilitate greater sharing of information about threats to our public and private networks, including the rampant theft of intellectual property and trade secrets by hackers working on behalf of foreign governments and foreign companies. And I also appreciate their good faith efforts to work with me and other members who have continuing concerns about the protections for American privacy and civil liberties in the bill. When the Intelligence Committee held an open hearing on the bill earlier this year, the witnesses echoed in public what many others have said in private. Paul Smocher from the Financial Services Roundtable said, in response to a question from the ranking member, that the provider of the information is in the best position to anonymize it. Kevin Mandia from Mandiant told the committee that in 20 years of doing cybersecurity, I've never seen a package of threat intelligence that's actionable that also includes personally identifiable information. And Governor Englander from the Business Roundtable said that he did not think that reasonable efforts were an unreasonable thing to ask of companies that are sharing information. In the legislation introduced last year by Senator Feinstein and incorporated into the Cybersecurity Act, reasonable efforts are required. In the legislative proposal put forward by the White House in 2011, reasonable efforts were also required, and that issue is specifically cited in the veto threat issued last year. The veto threat issued this year echoes that same continuing concern, where the administration provides. The administration, however, remains concerned that the bill does not require private entities to take reasonable steps to remove irrelevant personal information when sending cybersecurity data to the government or other private sector entities. Citizens have a right to know that corporations will be held accountable and not granted immunity for failing to safeguard personal information adequately. The administration is committed to working with all stakeholders to find a workable solution to this challenge. Moreover, the administration is confident that such measures can be crafted in a way that is not overly onerous or cost prohibitive on businesses sending the information. That is what our amendment intends and attempts to do. Civil liberties and privacy groups have also supported the inclusion of this provision. Now, as the chairman and ranking member mentioned, the committee did adopt an amendment to require efforts by the government receiving the information to remove personally identifiable information. And while that's a positive step that I supported, government-side minimization is insufficient for a couple reasons. First, it still means that private companies are sending personal data to the government that they don't need to send, that reasonable efforts could remove. And second, and most significantly, the bill contemplates two types of information sharing. It contemplates private sector sharing information with the government and the private sector sharing information with other private sector entities. In the case of private-to-private sharing, government minimization has no role. The government is not in the loop. And therefore, in order to ensure that people's personal data, which they have not agreed to share with other companies, is excised when reasonably possible, This amendment would provide that reasonable efforts should be undertaken in exchange for a broad grant of immunity. To conclude, I believe this amendment is an important one in the scope of the bill. I hope it will be made in order. Of the major privacy concerns with the bill, the vast majority are ameliorated, or many are ameliorated by this amendment. It would not in any way undercut the purpose of the bill, and along with other changes that my colleague will advocate, it will greatly improve the bill and give the American people the confidence of knowing that reasonable efforts are being undertaken to protect their privacy. And with that, I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schakowsky. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to add my congratulations to Mr. Rogers and Mr. Ruppersberger for not only working together in a bipartisan way, but to making significant steps toward improving the bill. But as the administration's statement of administration policy said, there are still a couple of things that we could do that don't undermine our efforts to protect us from cybersecurity, but do enhance the protection of privacy and civil liberties. And so let me just read one of the things. The administration supports the longstanding tradition to treat the Internet and cyberspace as civilian spheres while recognizing that the nation's cybersecurity requires shared responsibility from individual users, private sector network owners and operators, and the appropriate collaboration of civilian law enforcement and national security entities in government. H.R. 624 appropriately seeks to make clear that existing private-public relationships, whether voluntary, contractual, or regulatory, should be preserved and uninterrupted by this newly authorized information sharing. However, newly authorized information sharing for cybersecurity purposes from the private sector to the government should enter the government through a civilian agency, the Department of Homeland Security. So I'm introducing this amendment to ensure that U.S. military or defense agencies do not directly collect or receive cyber information on American citizens. And I want to thank my colleagues, Adam Schiff, Benny Thompson, Sheila Jackson-Lee, Diana DeGette, and Jared Polis for co-sponsoring. So what my amendment does simply is state that companies can only report cyber threat information directly to civilian agencies, ensuring that the NSA and the Department of Defense do not directly collect sensitive information on American citizens. And this really is in keeping with the long-held American tradition that the military does not operate on U.S. soil against or collect upon U.S. citizens. I believe that empowering the NSA or any other military agency to routinely collect sensitive information on Americans goes against this cornerstone of our democracy. So my amendment is very simple. No military agencies get the information, can go to Homeland Security, and without delay, I understand the time sensitivity of this, go to other appropriate agencies if necessary.
Thank you very much. Mr. Franks, welcome to the committee. Your presence here today is important. I am well aware from discussions that you and I have had that up to and including some of your not only interest but professional conduct within the House as the Missile Defense Chairman of the caucus, that you come across not only information but sharing of information as it relates to national security. And I want to thank you for the efforts that you make on a regular basis to protect this country, and delighted that your gentleman is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would return the compliment in every way. I know that with all of the challenges you have as the chairman of this committee, it's difficult to find time to focus on other issues like national security, but you do so, and I'm grateful, and I think it's a boon to the country. Chairman Sessions and members, I am sincerely grateful to you for allowing me to be here today to discuss what would be, in my judgment, an important amendment to the Cyber Intelligence Sharing and Protection Act, or CISPA. And I would start out by saying that I believe CISPA is a strong and critical step in the right direction to protect our nation's most treasured intellectual property. and national security secrets from theft or otherwise landing in the wrong hands. I want you to know that this bipartisan bill has my strongest support, and I think that Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Ruppersberger are both to be commended for their heroic work on this bill. Mr. Chairman, nearly all systems that are susceptible to cybersecurity threats are also vulnerable to natural or man-made EMP or electromagnetic pulse. Consequently, in a severe event, a major EMP event could be the ultimate cybersecurity threat. The overlapping relationship between cybersecurity and EMP is not a new idea. In fact, it was the central focus of the GRID Act of the 111th Congress, which was comprehensive legislation that protected our nation from cyber threats and protected our national our national electric grid from its vulnerability to EMP and severe space weather. The GRID Act, Mr. Chairman, passed through the Energy and Commerce Committee unanimously. It also passed the House floor unanimously as well, only to be stalled in the Senate, not because of the EMP provisions, but because of the conflicting approaches in the Senate to the cybersecurity provisions. The amendment before you would broaden the definition of cyber threat information, cyber threat intelligence, cyber security purpose, and cybersecurity system within CISPA to ensure that these terms include vulnerabilities to natural and man-made electromagnetic pulse. The reality, Mr. Chairman, of potentially devastating effects of sufficiently intense electromagnetic pulse on the electronic systems and sources of many of our critical defense and national security apparatus is well established. We as a nation have spent hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars over the years hardening our nuclear triad, our missile defense capabilities, and numerous other critical elements of our national security apparatus against the effects of electromagnetic pulse, particularly the type of EMP that might be generated against us by an enemy. However, our civilian grid, which the Defense Department relies on for nearly 99% of its electricity needs, at least in the continental United States, is completely vulnerable to the same kind of danger. This, in my judgment, constitutes an invitation on the part of certain enemies of the United States to use the asymmetric capability of an EMP weapon against us. And there is now evidence that such strategy is being considered by certain of those enemies. Mr. Chairman and members, the time is ripe for action that may gain us no fame or fanfare in the annals of history. However, it may happen that someday an event so significant will have an effect so small that only a few of us will recognize what a cataclysmic disaster was averted. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would thank the committee, and because of discussions with certain members of the Congress and certain members of leadership, we think we have a better way than this amendment to approach this issue. And so I would respectfully withdraw my amendment and again relay my gratitude to the committee. And it was requested that I pass out just the short one-page article from the Heritage Foundation so that some of the members could understand this issue a little better.
Without
Thank you,
objection,
Mr.
we'll
Chairman.
include that in your testimony. I thank the gentleman not only for working with, notwithstanding the committee, House leadership, and the Rules Committee, but I want to thank you for taking time. And I do believe I will see you at another point, this not to excuse you, but to suggest that we would love to see you back here. And if the gentleman, because he's withdrawn his amendment, would wish to be excused at this time, he would be excused. Mr. Barton, I have looked at your amendment, and I like it.
Well, good. Make it in order.
Well, that might well happen, but I really appreciate your thoughtfulness to,
Thank you.
think about the things as you pass data and information as we share. It was done solely for the purpose of national security, not for the purpose of any advantage for one company or another, or to use that data.
Exactly.
And so I just would say...
We're just trying to shut the barn door and keep it shut, Mr. Chairman. And
as the old saying goes among Texans, good fences make better neighbors.
there you go.
So,
And the bill this year is a much better bill than last year's bill, and both the leadership on both sides of the aisle should be commended. It is my intention, if if my amendment's made in order and passes, which I hope it will, to vote for the bill, which I didn't last year. So
I did not intend to put that standard up to you, but I'm delighted with your testimony. Mr. Cole. Are there any questions off? Okay. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Polis?
For Mr. Kowski and Mr. Schiff, I mean, do you think that with your amendments, if our committee makes them in order, we can still accomplish the purpose of protecting ourselves from cybersecurity threats?
Absolutely. There's nothing that would preclude us from doing the information sharing necessary to protect the country by requiring that reasonable efforts be made to remove personal information. It may be that there are cases where that personal information cannot be untied from the cyber threat. We're not asking you to do the impossible, only what's reasonable. And similarly, with respect to my colleague's amendment that I join, the chair and ranking member recognized that in their newest amendment, the DHS should have the primary role. I think that language still needs a lot of work because it appears that even though in this new amendment DHS has a primary role, that information can still be shared directly with other agencies by the private sector, and that's problematic. But given both of these issues can easily, I think, be resolved, and these amendments would go a long way to doing that.
Mr. Kowski?
Yeah. Both of these amendments are completely compatible with our efforts to protect ourselves from cyber attacks. My amendment in no way precludes the NSA or any other military agency from receiving information once it's routed through a civilian agency.
And wasn't there, I think, open testimony to your committee in February that confirmed, in fact, with regard to Mr. Schiff's amendment, that there was a reasonable thing to do, to have in there the language?
You know, it was really quite striking because obviously all the witnesses were chosen by the chair and ranking member. To a person, they all said that this was a reasonable thing to do. Indeed, they were already doing it. And Mandia, one of the foremost experts in the field, said that the private parties are really in the best position to anonymize the data. That wasn't perhaps the response that was expected, but that was their genuine reaction. And plainly, nothing in their testimony indicated that this would be onerous in any way. In fact, much to the contrary.
I thank you, and I would encourage the chair and the committee to make the Schiff and Schakowsky amendments in order. The Schakowsky amendment, of course, clarifying the traditional distinction between civilian agencies and military agencies and their jurisdiction, a critical precedent for our civil liberties and for our country. And Mr. Schiff's, which was generally agreed as completely viable operationally by all of the witnesses who testified on it, including those selected by the chair.
Just allow me one last word on both amendments, and that is plainly this has been a central issue for the last couple of years for the White House, in the Senate, as well as in the House. Making both of these amendments in order would give the House an opportunity to weigh in on the critical remaining issues and express a view, yes, we should adopt them, or no, we shouldn't. But I would urge that the members of the House be empowered to express their support or opposition to these amendments.
And I would encourage the chair to follow that counsel, again, particularly with the particular nature of the Intelligence Committee, which sometimes operates in ways that are behind closed doors and more difficult for members and their staff to follow. I know this was discussed in committee and voted upon. I hope that our full membership would have that same opportunity because these are very important issues. With that, I'll yield back to the chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Webster.
I just had one question, Mr. Chairman, of each of the panelists. Will you support the bill if your amendment is put in order? Yes or no? Would you support? Yeah, all three of you.
You know, if the amendments that Mr. Schakowsky, Mr. Conyers, and I have offered were adopted, it would meet all of the major objections, and I would intend to support it.
If the amendments are adopted, I will support it. If not, as in committee, I will oppose the bill in the House.
Chairman Roslin, Chairwoman Roslin, Gentleman Dr. Burgess. Thank you to each of you for taking time. Once again, the committee does want, need, and expect the body, the membership of this body, to view that this committee with great seriousness, will not only understand what you're trying to convey to us and the importance therein, but also respect you for taking time to thoughtfully gain the expertise necessary to come before the committee and answer the questions and bring your ideas. We're delighted that you have taken time to be here today, and I want to thank each of you very much for your candid observations and the ability to exercise yourself before the committee.
I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the members of the committee, and I also want to give you all some Texas trivia. It's the first time in the history of the Congress that the chairman and the ranking member for the Rules Committee have both been from Texas. Louis Slaughter was born in El Paso, Texas. I bet y'all didn't know that.
Now, you know what? We're only separated at birth, but other than that, I did not know that. Louise has never even admitted that under oath.
We've got Texas leadership on a bipartisan basis in the Rules Committee.
Now, since you're going to throw trivia, what Texans have served as chairman? Louis Slaughter, as not representing Texas, but born in Texas. Right. Have we had a Texan city member of Congress be the chairman of the Rules Committee before?
I think you're the first.
Okay. I hated to go out there
Mr.
and
Frost got pretty close
to
the totem pole, but he never became chairman.
Yes, he did. Well, two Texans at the top of the ticket sound good to me.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chairman, you could be the first Texas chairman to make these amendments in order. And that would be a distinction.
Thank you very much. And we do appreciate each of you taking time today.
And I love your water pitchers. We have old clunky plastic pitchers in the Energy and Commerce Committee. You have cute little Mr. Kool-Aid pitchers here.
Well, they really are cute. I remember those, the plastic ones that we used to have with a little face that was on them. Thank you very much, and all three of you are excused at this time. We now have what I recognize are three witnesses that remain, and the gentleman, Mr. Polis, will be recognized last, and the gentleman, Mr. Polis, can either choose to come down or stay at his seat. We recognize the gentlewoman, Ms. Jackson Lee, the gentleman, of course, Mr. Johnson, for taking time. They have been sitting here very patiently, and we're delighted that you join us. The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, the Rules Committee, let me thank you for your courtesies again. It looks like a long afternoon, and since everybody is claiming Texas, I claim it, and Mr. Chairman, likewise, I hope you will be generous to Texas and others when it comes to the submission and the admission of the amendments that have been offered in the Rules Committee. I venture to say that this is an important enough issue that we could have an open rule. I will try to summarize my amendments. They are extensively, I think, recounted in the listing that you have, but let me try to just expand briefly on the amendments. My first amendment really is very simple and has to do with liability protection and indicates that if you are attacked, you have every right to defend, but it prevents offensive actions being taken against other private networks or computing devices as a response to the attack on you. It is a protective measure that I think is enormously important. A second amendment changes the language on page 11 of the bill that I was in review of that indicates a basis of disclosure of personal information, and my amendment adds the word imminent, death or serious bodily harm. That is not there, and I believe that the word imminent is not a limiting word that would put us in jeopardy, but I think it is an enhancing word for privacy protection. Certainly there is no doubt that information on the blogosphere relating to the horrific tragedy that just occurred, there would be no doubt that every moment, every aspect of information could be disclosed. But if it is remote, then I raise the question as to whether or not one would then be providing private information without restraints. That is my second amendment. My third amendment is an amendment to protect cloud computing businesses from federal agency requirements to report on customer account activity. This amendment makes it clear that cybersecurity providers need only provide information about cybersecurity incidents that pose a threat to federal government information. We've had an extended debate in a hearing on legislation judiciary. I think it is a particularly sensitive area. My amendment is very narrow and gives a limiting parameter in order to frame how you deal with the cloud issue. I have two Senses of Congress amendments that I'll briefly read together. The first states that it is the sense of Congress that the United States should facilitate international cooperative agreements to accomplish the objectives of formal rules of engagement, like those developed to protect hospitals and schools during time of conflict, a similar list of protected digital service providers or categories of digital technology. Consumers could ensure the protection of electric utility grids, refineries, oil and gas extraction systems, water treatment systems, digital medical devices, and hospitals should never be legitimate targets. It's a sense of Congress because it begins our thinking process to move forward on issues that impact the everyday living of our country. And I believe it's an important statement to be put on the cybersecurity bill. The second sense of Congress states that federal government computing devices should use strong encryption to protect stored data as well as digital information as it travels over the Internet. Both senses of Congress are also offered as a single amendment for the committee's consideration. My final amendment offered singularly is an amendment to establish the Department of Homeland Security as the lead agency for engaging the private sector on matters related to cybersecurity. This amendment reflects the general policy offered by the White House on a civilian agency taking lead in these matters. And I frankly believe that that is a very important statement that we make as a government run by civilians and as a government that embraces the Constitution and respects aspects of privacy as enunciated in the Ninth Amendment, but certainly questions of due process and others. It's extremely important that privacy remain an important element, and a civilian agency be the lead on that. The Internet is indeed, and this whole world of cybersecurity continues to grow. It's a major form of communication, but we've seen it victimize the United States as an entity by way of international hackers. We know we have to do something. I think this is an important bill. But it has no physical landscape. There are billions of devices, and the more we can refine the legislation on privacy questions, on the issues dealing with cloud, on the issues dealing with when you disclose privacy information, I think the better off we are. I would like to associate myself with the Conway-Sewell Amendment that expands the lead, I believe, through the intelligence agency, the DOJ, and Homeland Security. I do believe it's very, very crucial to have Homeland Security involved, and certainly would hope that in future legislative initiatives that the bill will be referred to our committee. I'm also a co-sponsor of the Conyers bill amendment on liability and the last amendment offered by Tchaikovsky and Schiff on privacy. I would hope that the amendments that I've offered here individually could be considered as adding to, I think, a stronger bill framework for legislation that will be lasting and be the framework for going forward for many years to come, since cybersecurity is not going away. In fact, its breadth and depth will be expanded. And I thank the members for listening.
Thank you very much. By the way, without cannot talk today. Without exception, your statement will be entered into the record.
Mr. Chair, before we get to questions, did you want me to present mine, or did
I am going to call it. Did you want to move down here? Did you want to stay?
I was going to ask where I would have a greater chance of influencing the committee. Wherever you want me to move.
That's a valid question.
Yes,
that's a valid question. But I want to thank both of you very much, and I would allow the gentleman now from Colorado to plead his case, and the gentleman's recognized.
Okay, and as I said, whatever location the chair would have me at. Very good. First of all, there's an update. My amendment that I offered that I'm hoping will be made in order is bipartisan. It's been joined as a co-sponsor by Mr. Amash of Michigan. And essentially what we do is we address this issue that leaves the door wide open with regard to bodily harm and all of these kind of extraneous things in the bill. I'm not the first to identify these. I would point out that the Center for Democracy and Technology has also identified that the serious bodily harm exemption should be further narrowed and also required that it be imminent. The imminent issue is also very important because, as has been testified with regard to the threat, there are tens of thousands of cybersecurity assaults every day, tens of thousands of attempts. So there is always a threat to everything at every moment. I mean, every major website, when I ran an e-commerce company, there were, hundreds, thousands of hacking attempts every day. It's because that's the way that they're done by automated bots in many cases. So it needs to be an imminent threat. So we do insert the word imminent. We also make it very clear that this bill has to do with cybersecurity. We add the language, notwithstanding paragraph 1, the federal government may only use cyber threat information shared with the federal government in accordance with subsection B to prevent an imminent cyber attack, which is the goal of the bill. And I believe that if allowed by this committee, I'm confident that it will, of course, have strong support on the floor, and it would improve the bill by making it very clear that it is for cybersecurity and has nothing to do with these various other bodily harm issues that may or may not involve football or gun show organizing or all of these other things that have been pulled in under the current language. So I would strongly encourage the committee to allow the Schiff Amendment, the Schakowsky Amendment, the Amash-Massey Amendment 31, the Amash-Massey Amendment 32, as well as my own amendment, which with Amash, the number of that amendment is 20. So I think with those amendments, Mr. Chair, the bill will be vastly improved. It will still meet our nation's needs of keeping our economy, our networks, our security safe. And at the same time, will ensure that the confidence in the Internet ecosystem is not damaged, jobs are not destroyed, and people's privacy is protected. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for allowing me to testify today in support of my amendment. Before I start, I would claim some relation to the great state of Texas myself. And some of my best years were spent down there in law school, down in Houston, Texas. And I love Texas. When I'm not here, I usually have on a pair of cowboy boots and a cowboy hat. For those who...
Mr. Chair, I will too if my amendment is allowed.
All right. All right. And so, that having been said, Mr. Chairman, I'd like for my amendment to be found to be in order.
Mr. Johnson, was that considered groveling before the chairman? And the ranking member from Texas?
I'm just happy to be in your presence.
It's okay.
And
Both of
my
us are.
seat right here.
It's working.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, sir. The security and cyber threats that we face in our nation are quite grave. And being a member of the Armed Services Committee, which protects our country from external forces, is a great place for me to acquire the knowledge to appreciate the need for legislation in this area. And then being a lawyer, on top of that, and lawyers, or the Judiciary Committee basically is responsible for protecting us from ourselves, internal threats. I think I'm in a good position to offer this amendment. This bill is like giving an inch where an inch is needed, but also giving a mile that is not necessary. This bill goes too far. It would authorize government agencies to share personal data with law enforcement for issues unrelated to cybersecurity, such as children's safety and child pornography. It also allows sharing for investigating cybersecurity crimes, which would likely include any allegation of a crime involving a computer connected to a network. So I have several questions for this committee. They're rhetorical. Why is it that the same information that is necessary to combat cyber threats also necessary to combat child pornography? Does preventing a cyber Pearl Harbor also require that we authorize intelligence agencies to coordinate with law enforcement agencies to find abducted children? I offer an amendment that protects the privacy of Americans from warrantless intrusions by law enforcement unless there is an imminent cybersecurity threat. My amendment would strike provisions of H.R. 624 that would allow information for purposes unrelated to imminent cybersecurity threats. These non-germane provisions include information sharing for computer crimes, child pornography, and children's safety issues. Let me be clear, these are all issues that deserve our attention, but is a broad cybersecurity bill really how we want to address those issues? We cannot pass a bill to facilitate information sharing without strict rules governing privacy, especially in a bill that would become the law of the land for any unauthorized access to a system or network. The federal government is already collecting large swaths of personal information from individuals. The FBI is currently working to compile perhaps the largest biometric database in the world through its next generation identification. This system, which is one of many that collects personal data, uses cameras and facial recognition along with other collected materials to compile DNA profiles, iris scans, palm prints, voice identification profiles, photographs, and other identifying information. This is only one example. Each piece of identifying information about a person represents new abilities for the state to persistently track citizens without a warrant. We must protect the liberties and privacy of Americans and not erode the Fourth Amendment in the name of cybersecurity. Privacy should bring us together, not divide us. The protection of Americans' privacy is not a Democratic or Republican issue. Indeed, it's one of the few issues that those on opposite sides of the political spectrum have long embraced. I ask my colleagues to come together to uphold the Fourth Amendment's guarantee of rights of Americans to be free from government searches without probable cause, and I ask once again that my amendment be found to be in order. And I yield back.
Mr. Johnson, thank you very much. Mr. Polis, and also the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, thank you very much for taking time to be with us. I have a question, please. Ms. Jackson Lee, do you consider the FBI a civilian agency?
I do, and I consider the Department of Homeland Security a civilian agency. And I know there's language in the bill that passes the data on to one of our agencies in Homeland Security. I think there's a distinction between the terminology of lead, and however, I've also indicated that the amendment that Mr. Conway and Ms. Sewell offered is a fair balance. I might just lean toward, as a domestic security agency, the Homeland Security, which collaborates very well with the FBI and certainly the Department of Justice, as it is doing now, as we well know, in Boston, where they are the lead, and Homeland Security is providing the resources or any assistance that they may need. So I just think that it would be a fair compromise for that agency to be the lead.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank our colleagues for being here, but I have no question.
Mrs. Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any questions, but I do want to talk about Texas a minute. Joe Barton and I have been friends for an awful long time, and I'm really very fond of him. I told him I'd met my husband in Texas, in San Antonio, and I've always been so grateful for that I really love the place. So I'm going to ask all of you not to say anything to Joe, because we've gotten along really well all these years, having him think I'm from Texas. So I was actually born in Kentucky, but if you won't tell him, I appreciate it very much. Thank you, because we've got along just fine with this for years now, so if you hear it, just say absolutely.
And you sound very much
I could fit in either place. Right. I'm bilingual. Thank you.
That mean you speak Texas also?
I speak North and South.
North and South. Mr. Bishop.
Ms. Slaughter, how much is it worth to you?
Well, I'm making awful good rhubarb pie.
At that level. Okay, I think we got a deal we can work out here.
Is there anyone else that might have a question for any of our panelists? Or do you want to question yourself, or do you wish to question the panelists?
That would be too easy, Mr. Chair. Instead, I will just simply say that I think that these are both excellent amendment ideas. Mr. Johnson's affects some of the same concerns that I had around imminent cybersecurity threats, and of course, Ms. Jackson-Lee has several excellent ideas, and I do hope that these are made in order, and I'll yield back.
Chairman?
Thank you very much.
May I?
Chairman Cole.
Thank you very much. I actually probably should have asked this question in the last panel. I've just asked it to all of you. Since there's obviously a great deal of White House concern about the bill, said some good things about it, but they still don't have what they want. I was just curious, in when you were putting together your amendments, did you have any conversation with the White House, and do you think if these amendments were adopted, they would go some way toward dealing with the concerns that the White House has expressed about the underlying bill?
Yeah, I've had no discussions with the White House, and I don't think anyone in my office has had any discussions either.
We took great pains to read the White House policy statement on cybersecurity and reach out to them, and so some of these suggestions reflect our interpretation of their policy. And I think if my final sentence would be that it strengthens the legislation, and I would hope they could look collaboratively on some of the issues dealing with privacy, some of the issues dealing with lead agencies, might be attractive as we move forward.
Thank you. I did not have any discussions with the White House. I was very pleased with their relatively strong statement of administrative policy. Reading and having, of course, just seen it over the last hour or two, but looking at the administration's objections, they certainly have a set of objections in the third paragraph that would essentially be solved largely by the Schiff Amendment. In the fourth paragraph, with regard to the civilian sphere, it's a reference in large part to the Schakowsky Amendment. So those two are explicitly called for, again, with the principles of carefully safeguarding privacy and civil liberties, preserving the longstanding respective roles of civilian and intelligence agencies, and providing for appropriate sharing with targeted liability protection. So those two would seem to be the most closely and explicitly called for in the SAP.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Woodall. Mr. Nugent. Mr. Webster. Chairwoman Roslayton, Dr. Burgess. I want to thank all three of you for taking time to be with us, not just with your ideas and your comments, but your belief that this committee would not just listen to you, but take seriously your ideas to better legislation that is important that gets done for the benefit of the American people and for the benefit of the free enterprise system and jobs and job creation and our money, our livelihood. So I want to thank all three of you for taking time to be here today. and for sitting around here waiting for everybody else to get yourself in line. You're excused at this time.
Thank you for your work on this committee, Mr. Chairman, as being in place of ideas for members to come and present them and be accepted, as we hope, respectfully.
Yes, ma'am. Well, as best I can tell you, I'm from a suburb of Houston, so I try and do my best to please the members from Houston, Texas also. The hearing portion of H.R. 624 is now closed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I want to move on, and the gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the committee grant H.R. 624, the Cyber Intelligence Sharing and Protection Act, a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule makes an order as original text for the purpose of amendment, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 113-7, and provides that it shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against the amendment in the nature of a substitute. The rule makes an order only those further amendments printed in the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in the report. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
You've now heard the, thank you very much. You've now heard the motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Is there any discussion or amendment by the committee?
Can I ask a question, Mr. Chairman?
A gentleman's recognized.
So if I'm looking at this, neither the Schakowsky nor the Shift amendments were made in order, right?
That would be correct. Shift number 11, as I understand it, was, and Schakowsky 23 was not.
Are they not germane?
They are germane.
And is there a reason why they weren't made in order?
The opportunity for the committee that brought the bill before us today in discussions not only with myself but with others did not believe that this was in the spirit of what would best support protecting this country, nor the sharing of information among agencies for the benefit.
Yeah, I appreciate the Chairman's response, but I think members of this House ought to have the opportunity to be able to make that decision on their own. And, you know, given the fact that it doesn't need any waivers and they're germane, I would hope that, anyway, that we would consider making these in order, but I yield back my time.
Mrs. Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first ask unanimous consent to put the administrative statement in. It's been discussed already, but we need to put it in the record. Thank you very much. And I'd like to echo what Mr. McGovern said, because Schiff and Schakowsky were very important for privacy, which is very important to all of us, and I think really strengthened the bill, and I feel very sorry that they were not made in order, expected they would be. So I'm going to have propose an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the amendment by Representative Schiff, number 11, which, as we said, is germane, which would require the private entities sharing information with the government. And this is important. Private entities sharing information with the government or other private entities under the bill make reasonable efforts to remove personally identifiable information of persons unrelated to the cyber threat. I don't find that startling or terrible. We did somewhat the same thing with the genetics non-discrimination bill. Because drug companies and healthcare insurers wanted to go through people's records to see what they wanted to do research on, and we knew they could do that perfectly well without identifying who they were, where they lived, and where they worked. So I think this really strengthens the bill, and I think we'll get you a lot more votes So I appreciate offering that amendment.
You've now heard the amendment from the gentlewoman from
Somewhere.
Kentucky, from New York.
Right. Nobody believes that.
You know, I didn't even start to believe it, Louise. And if I could, I'd just like to make a comment, because with great respect for not only Mr. Schiff and others who have testified today, I do recognize that this is an important issue to many people. With that said, I believe that the committee and the resolution of trying to make sure that information that the providers, they mentioned the Big Ten, I couldn't name them, but I think we could recognize that these Big Ten have established relationships already with intelligence agencies across the board that where they do business, and we're really not trying to jump in the middle of that. I think that the administration would recognize that the data that would come to them, personal data, would be stripped out. And that, in fact, what they're trying to find is the threat against not just wherever it was intended, but a larger threat to the Internet is what they're trying to stop, notwithstanding personal information, because that would be stripped out of there. So
This is an extra protection.
I do recognize that. I do recognize that. So any further discussion on the Slaughter Amendment? We'll now vote on the Slaughter Amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. The no votes.
I have a roll call, please.
Gentlewoman's asked for a roll call.
Ms. Fox? Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent? Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Ross-Leitonen? No. Ms. Ross-Leitonen, no. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, no. Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern? Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis? Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
Amendment is not agreed to. Are there further amendments or discussion?
Mr. Polis.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers to the amendment by Mr. Amash, number 31, which I've co-sponsored, which would permit an entity to provide through enforceable contract that it will not share personally identifiable information with the federal government. If I may speak to that, Mr. Chair.
The gentleman is recognized.
This is a very important amendment, and while, of course, wait a second, this is 31 or 32? One moment, please. This is 31, that's correct. So while we appreciate that 32 has been made in order, which essentially makes the language of CISPA consistent with some additional protections in the Patriot Act to ensure that things like library circulation records, book sales, firearm sales can explicitly not be used, even if they are in accordance with other areas of law. We do appreciate that. This amendment, number 31, is far more important because currently, again, as was I talked about with Mr. Rogers when he was here, a contract between a user and a company that you give your information to, even if that contract says we will not share your information with the government, the second after you sign it, the company is completely indemnified for going and giving all the information to the federal government. All this Amash Amendment does, number 31, I think it's very common sense, is it allows for enforceable contracts between companies and individuals that they won't share identifiable information with the federal government. There's been a lot of talk about that, oh, they'll strip out the identifiers, oh, they won't have the identifiers. So we're just saying a company can, in fact, have a user agreement, terms of use, that says we will not share your identifiable information with the government. And we're just saying that piece needs to be enforceable, and therefore the indemnification cannot apply in direct violation of that explicit aspect of the contract. So I hope that our committee will make an order Amash 31, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Is there further discussion on this amendment? I would tell you that in a meeting that I had with the committee including the representatives from the committee that were included in today's testimony. There was a good bit of discussion and debate, not only about this, but about the overall feeling that really information was being passed. I feel very strongly, as I'm sure every member of this committee does, some of us enunciate that with a certain agency, which I could very easily do, but that the overall effort of what this bill is about is not to pass personal data or information, and that would be stripped out, and that to get in and to selectively identify certain aspects or certain agencies as opposed to the existence of personal data that would be excluded. And I think that's a clear way to look at it, and so I'd offer a no vote. Further discussion? Those in favor of the gentleman's amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The noes have it.
Roll call vote, Mr. Chair.
Roll call is requested.
Ms. Fox? No. Ms. Fox? No. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop? No. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Nugent? Mr. Nugent? No. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster? No. Ms. Ross-Leitman? No. Ms. Ross-Leitman? No. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess? No. Ms. Slaughter? Aye. Ms. Slaughter? Aye. Mr. McGovern? Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk report.
5 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Are there further amendments?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to offer an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order in block, the Schakowsky Amendment number 23 and the Polis Amendment number 20. First Amendment 23 would require the first point of sharing information with the federal government be a civilian agency. This is one of the objections that noted in the Statement of Administrative Policy. And, of course, the Polis Amendment number 20, which would address this issue of bodily harm, which somehow worked its way into a cybersecurity digital ones and zeros bill, people stubbing their toes, people breaking their arms, completely unrelated, and it takes that out. Yield back.
Thank you very much. In discussions with the committee, including the representatives that met with us today and others, there was a discussion about this, and the gentleman may have been privy to that. I believe Ms. Schakowsky was, and they attempted, meaning the principals who were engaged in this, to really get closer to the effect of what Mrs. Schakowsky is aiming at in Amendment number 23. With that said, I believe that what Mrs. Schakowsky has done by moving her amendment is proper to come support it and to make sure we understand it. It's my understanding that the principals that are involved really do believe that we can get closer at this pending an agreement with each other and how it might work in law, and perhaps would see itself in some sort of a conference committee with the knowledge that what you tried to do was bring it here to this committee, and I would at this time offer a recommendation for a no vote. Further discussion? Those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. No. The noes have it.
Roll call vote, Mr. Chair.
Roll call.
Ms. Fox? No. Ms. Fox? No. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop? No. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Nugent? Mr. Nugent? No. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster? No. Ms. Ross-Leitman? No. Ms. Ross-Leitman? No. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess? No. Ms. Slaughter? Aye. Ms. Slaughter? Aye. Mr. McGovern? Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Polis? Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman? No.
Clerk report.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Are there further amendment or further debate? All right. The vote will now be on the motion offered by the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall, will handle this for the Republicans. And the gentleman, Mr. Hastings, will handle that. I would like to, if I could, just to take one more minute and offer a viewpoint that is really meant to clarify my support of every single member of this committee, not only for taking time to be here today on this important issue, but really for sticking with a clearer understanding. I thought that our questioning was sharp and direct. I think that during my years on this committee, and perhaps others, would recognize that this committee has an important process, and that is to challenge those who come forth from this committee with specifics of an understanding that they have on a bipartisan basis where they can point to their ideas in the bill. And there are few times that this committee gets into such a level of detail as is required for personal liberties, which protect all of us. And we have all taken an obligation and have a duty to make sure that the job performance that we have is up to the effectiveness of meeting the needs of a constitutional standard. And that means that we understand what we are doing when we pass laws. And so I really do want to take just a second and say, Judge Hastings, thank you very much. Welcome back. But to each and every one of you, whether your amendment was made in order or not, I respect you and for being here, and I want to thank each of you. And we do not expect any other meeting that would take place during the week. And thank you very much. We're now adjourned.